All right, today we are diving into a really big one. It's the nearly 900-page policy document called Mandate for Leadership, which is basically the guiding text for Project 2025. Over the next few minutes, we're going to break down its core ideas, and we'll be using slides drawn right from the source material itself. Okay, let's get into it.
First thing you should know is that this whole idea isn't actually new. The 2025 mandate is very consciously based on a super influential version from the Reagan administration. And as you can see from this quote, that original plan was incredibly successful. It really sets the stage for this new version's ambition, to be a ready-to-go playbook for making huge changes and making them fast. So, to make sense of this whole thing, here's how we're going to break it down. First, we'll cover what the mandate actually is. Second, we'll get into its core idea, which is all about dismantling what it calls the administrative state. Third, we'll see how that idea applies to specific government departments. Fourth, we'll look at its focus on culture and family. And finally, we'll talk about the ultimate goal, what the document calls the conservative promise.
Okay, so first up, what exactly is this document? Well, at its heart, the Mandate for Leadership is a really detailed policy guide. It's meant to be used in the first 180 days of a new administration, and it's designed to fundamentally change the entire federal government right from day one. Think of it like this. The mandate is a massive, collaborative effort. You've got hundreds of conservative thinkers and former officials all contributing. And its stated goal isn't just to make a few little policy changes here and there. Nope, it's to completely deconstruct the federal government as we know it, and then rebuild it based on a very specific conservative vision. All right, now we get to the absolute core of the entire document. Seriously, to understand anything else we're about to talk about, you have to get what the mandate means when it talks about dismantling the administrative state. So what is this administrative state? Well, according to the mandate, it's the giant bureaucracy of career government employees. You know, the civil servants. The document argues that this bureaucracy operates with what it calls Wilsonian hubris, which is basically the idea that unelected experts should run the show. The mandate says this has turned the bureaucracy into an unconstitutional fourth branch of government that isn't accountable to anyone. So the logic here is pretty straightforward. On one side, you have the problem as the mandate sees it, an unaccountable, politicized bureaucracy that's gone too far. And on the other side, you have the solution it proposes, to use the power of the president and use it aggressively to take back control. This all hinges on the idea that personnel is policy, meaning you replace career civil servants with political appointees who are loyal to the administration's agenda. And this is the key takeaway, really. The strategy laid out is all about using the existing power of the presidency to completely change the government itself. This quote really hammers it home, calling it an existential need, not just a political option, to reshape the entire federal workforce and what it does. Okay, so that's the big picture theory. Now let's see how it would actually work in practice. The mandate has hundreds of pages of detailed plans for pretty much every major federal department. We're just going to look at a few key examples. First, let's look at the Department of Defense. The document calls the DoD a deeply troubled institution and argues it has started to care more about what it calls leftist politics over military readiness. So to fix this, it proposes some pretty big changes. Things like making China the #1 national security priority, no questions asked. It also talks about restoring standards of lethality and changing personnel policies like expelling service members with gender dysphoria and getting rid of medical exceptions for conditions like HIV. Okay, next up, the Department of Justice. The plan here calls for a huge shakeup of the department, especially the FBI, and a major shift in what law enforcement should be focusing on. Some of these specific ideas include telling the FBI it can't police misinformation by Americans, getting rid of all DEI programs, and refocusing resources on violent crime instead of, say, parents who are protesting at school board meetings. It even suggests moving the FBI out of the DOJ completely. And let's do one more example, the Department of Education. The mandate claims that even after spending trillions of dollars, the department has totally failed to make students any smarter. So, the plan here is, well, it's pretty clear. Get rid of it. The document lays out a step-by-step process. First, you start moving its programs to other agencies. Then you turn federal funding into block grants that go straight to the states. And the final goal is to give all control over education back to the states and to parents. Now, this isn't just about shuffling government agencies around. The mandate also has a big section on how federal power could be used to deal with what it describes as a crisis in American culture and family life.
And this quote right here really shows you how central this idea is. It argues federal power shouldn't just be scaled back, it should be actively wielded to reverse what it calls the family crisis. And again, they describe this as an existential task. And the policies to get this done cover a lot of ground. We're talking about things like reversing FDA approval for chemical abortion drugs, ending what the document calls woke transgender activism at the Department of Health and Human Services, and also defending First Amendment rights and making married fathers a priority in welfare policy. So, that brings us to the final piece of the puzzle, the big objective that runs through the whole mandate for leadership, what the authors call the conservative promise. So, what's the end game here? According to the text itself, the ultimate goal is to shrink the federal government down to what the authors believe was its original size and scope under the Constitution. And the reason they give isn't just about politics or power. It's about creating the right conditions for what the document calls human flourishing. So there you have it. We've gone through the main pillars of the mandate for leadership, from taking on the administrative state to detailed plans for government departments. It's a really comprehensive, really ambitious blueprint. And all of this leaves us with one final, very important question to think about. What would actually happen to the role of the federal government in American life if this blueprint were put into action?